Hey, welcome back. I'm glad you're back. So we're going to talk about what we talked about today in Social Studies 20. And so today in Social Studies 20, one of the things that we talked about is our national interests and World War II. And so we've been talking about the start of World War I, the cause of World War I, the interwar years. And so we started today talking about World War II. And so in World War II, we essentially have two sides: the Axis powers, which are all fascists, Tokyo, which is Japan, Berlin, which is Germany, Rome, which is Italy, form the Axis, and the Allies are Britain, France, Russia, and the United States, and Canada, and so on. And so it's key that we remember that all the fascist nations, all the Axis nations had fascist ideology. And so what this essentially means is that all of them had a political system that favors the elites, favors racial and ethnic superiority, and eliminates and kills people who do not fit in with this structure. And so Japan, being one of the fascist nations, one of the Axis powers, essentially starts off as a liberator of Asian nations from colonizers. However, over time, what they start to do is they began to pursue an expansionist policy. And so that means they tried to gain more and more land. So they become the colonizers of Asia. And so they begin to drag the British and the French into, the British and the Americans into conflict with attacks such as Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. As a result of this, the United States, as a result of the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the Americans declare war on Japan, and as a result, they declare war on the allies of Japan in Germany. So, what sparks the war in Europe? So we've seen up until this point in the interwar years, Adolf Hitler violate the Treaty of Versailles, clause after clause after clause. We've seen him get the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. And essentially the line in the sand becomes after the Czechoslovakian agreement, the Munich agreement, they say no more. However, when Hitler invades Poland in September of 1941, France and Britain declare war on Germany. Hitler, before that, had actually signed an agreement with the USSR, or the Soviet Union. And so the reason why he had done that is because by signing an agreement with the Soviet Union, it makes sure that when he attacks Poland, the Soviet Union does not get in his way, right? And so he was able to take Poland, and this shocks the world because this agreement is a partnership between fascism and communism, which are ideologically opposed systems. And so with Hitler invading Poland, it's the line in the sand. The Allies declare war on him. However, remember that fighting doesn't actually start until 1940. And so they declare war in 1939, but fighting starts in 1940. So that period in between September 1939 and April 1940, we know it as the Phony War. And so Adolf Hitler, this is key, this will be on your test. Adolf Hitler wants to avoid trench warfare because this is what made World War I drag on for so long. And so he has this strategy instead called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. So the way Blitzkrieg works is Hitler hits a point hard and fast with his army and cars and motorcycles and tanks and planes. And every single resource he has, he hits one point hard and keeps moving on, rather than fighting trench warfare, which is all spread out. And so by using Blitzkrieg or lightning war, Hitler is able to go from city to city to city and take Europe incredibly quickly. And so Hitler, as we saw, is able to take over large swaths of Europe. However, there's this little island which stands in his way, and that is Britain. And so that starts the Battle of Britain. We saw Winston Churchill's stirring speeches: "We shall never surrender. We'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on the landing grounds. We'll fight them in the cities and the streets. We shall never surrender." However, Hitler begins to bomb civilian targets, essentially civilian centers, as a way to damage morale, as a way to damage the spirits of the British people. And that's where we get those rousing speeches from Winston Churchill saying, "We shall never surrender." So we talked about some of the weapons of war. So World War II essentially was actually more devastating than World War I, because a lot of the weapons that we saw in World War I, like tanks, aircraft, machine guns, have actually been improved on in the Second World War. And not only that, we start to see nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons become really, really key in the US battle against Japan when they drop nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which bring about the end of the war in Japan. So, the last thing we talked about today is the turning points of the battle. So we saw that World War II was actually fought on a larger scale than World War I, in Asia, in the Pacific, in Africa, in Europe. And so some of the turning points on the Western front, that's Western Europe, the big turning point is D-Day. And in Eastern Europe, the big turning point is the Battle of Stalingrad, in which the Soviet force is able to turn back the Nazis. And so Stalingrad in the east, D-Day in the west, and they're able to push together to meet at Berlin. The big battle in Africa was the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt. In the Pacific, with the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. And essentially, all these battles are the moments in which the Allies begin to turn the tide on the Axis powers. And so this is a quick review of what we talked about today. Please make sure you go over your notes, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.